thank you for that intro. That might be the best intro I've had as a lawyer coming to do a legal talk. So thank you for that. And thank you all for coming. Today I'm going to talk to you about contracts and law. As the title of my talk is called, It Takes Two to Sign a Contract. You need, well, at least two. That contracts and legal things are not a one-sided thing. Sometimes when you're dealing with contracts, you may be given one and think, I don't know what to do with this. It's very overwhelming. But a lot of developers might kind of put them aside and not want to think about them. But they are important and they're worth engaging with and being involved with because it takes two to sign a contract. So before I begin, I'll say a little bit about myself. So I am a video games, esports, and I guess interactive entertainment lawyer. So I also work with sort of content creators in the gaming space on all manner of legal issues. I've worked in the games industry for over 10 years now, 8 of them in the legal industry, starting as a paralegal for an esports company when that was the big thing. And then that sort of slowly died, and then I went back into traditional video games. But prior to that, I also worked as effectively a booth babe at Comic-Con and Paris Games Week. I used to demo VR headsets to people and consumers at trade shows. So that was really my start in the games industry. My current practice as a lawyer, my firm tends to support companies all across the games industry. So we work with developers, publishers, engine manufacturers, middleware providers, IP rights holders, everything in between. I personally work with a lot of indie games development studios, so that's my passion. Obviously, that's why I'm really grateful to be here talking to all you guys, because these are the type of games that I'm passionate about. I'm based in London, so our firm is in the heart of London in Soho, and we also have some offices abroad, but we don't really talk about those. We don't need to for that. And as I said, I'm a big supporter of indie games. Currently, all my time is being consumed by Bull Pit. I don't know if there are any fans of that game. Woo! Yeah, I love that game. That's great. And yeah, some indie developers have described me as the Phoenix Wright of the legal industry. I've never called myself that, but if people want to refer to me as that, they may. I'll leave that up to you. Who just said objection? Thank you, sir. This might be the greatest moment in my career of presenting legal talks. So why are we here? Not to answer the existential question of why we are here on this planet. As I've said, I've worked in the games industry for almost 10 years. I've done hundreds of game deals, and as a result, I've seen hundreds of contracts. I've seen everything from the good, the bad, the ugly, the mistakes, the mishaps, the full-blown disasters, and really, I just want to help you guys, with a very quick whistle-stop tour of some top tips that you can put into practice immediately. I'm not here to try and teach you the law, and I'm not here to sort of teach you the law, and I'm just here to give you some tips, effectively. So it's going to be a top 10 list. I know how much everyone loves top 10 lists. I also really love memes, so I'm going to try and make this extremely dense talk about law slightly fun with some memes. So here we go. This is not clickbait, I promise you, but you won't believe number 8. So first one is to get organized. Developing a game, it's a very creative venture, and there's a lot of fun things at the start of a project where you're very excited about making this game, and you've got all these ideas and plans. But unfortunately, there is a sort of rather more boring, admin side, and those things are really, really important. So for example, things like setting up a company. It's really, really easy to do, and it's very inexpensive, but I've had clients who have released the game just as an individual, and overnight, not overnight, but maybe within the first month or so, they became quite successful, and suddenly the money's rolling in, and they're like, oh God, I'm paying income tax on this, not corporation tax, and this is a nightmare. Obviously a great problem to have. But those are the kind of, first world problems. And I've also seen situations around, if you're working with other people on projects, your friends, maybe you are a student, or maybe a bunch of people have come together with a great idea, everything's great at the very beginning, but anything can happen in game development, and getting things like paperwork in place with contractors, or understanding how the company you're forming is going to be run. Who makes the decisions? Who owns what? How is revenue going to be divided amongst you? You're all friends. You don't really want to have these conversations, but promise me, it's better to have those conversations earlier rather than later. So get organized. Read and understand your contract. So there's two parts of this. Reading it, that's pretty self-explanatory. Definitely read your contracts, please. Because some people, they just, as I said, don't want to engage with them, and that just leads to all sorts of problems. But the second part of it is understand your contract. So that's slightly trickier because many of you may never have dealt with a contract before, you may not have had to read one, and even if you have read one, that can almost be more problematic because you feel like, yeah, I kind of know what this is. You might flick through it, give it a read, and think, yeah, everything that's supposed to be there is in there, this is great. But I can promise you, one sentence, one tiny little nuance in the contract can completely change what something means. So definitely spend time making sure you understand your contract. And particularly with publishing contracts, or when you're dealing with someone else who has created the contract and has sent it to you to review it, if you don't understand it, ask them questions. Don't feel, I've definitely had many clients who have felt, oh, but if I ask my publisher questions about the contract, they're going to think I'm a problematic developer, that, oh, they're not going to want to work with me because I'm asking all these questions. If you have a publisher who is doing that, that is a red flag. Like, I would find that really concerning if they say, we don't want to answer any of your questions about the contract, we don't want you to understand this, we want you to just sign it. So definitely make sure you understand it. The next one is, we have this term in law called conducting due diligence. It's a very fancy way of saying do your homework. So you may have never worked with, again, a lot of these are sort of related to publishing contracts, but it applies generally to anyone that you're entering into a contract with. Do a little bit of homework on who they are, like how they operate. If they're a publisher and you've never worked with them before, look up some of the other games they've published, reach out to some of those developers, have a chat with them. How's it been? Like, have they had problems? Especially with games that have already come out and they've done a complete development cycle working with that publisher. Has there been any problems? Has there been any issues that have come up? How's the publisher dealt with them? Have they kind of wanted to work with you? I've had clients who have had issues where, develop at the start of the relationship, the game's going really well and development's going fine, and then hype hasn't reached as high and wish list numbers aren't that great, and then suddenly the publisher starts dropping off a little bit and starts cutting corners, and it's just you don't want to be in a relationship sometimes with a publisher who operates in that way, but you just won't know that at the start of a contract. So try and speak to some other developers, see how it is to deal with them. My clicker has stopped working. Okay. I don't know how to move on to the next slide.
Are you sure you haven't slid the power button on? Because I've done that before.
Oh, is there a power button on here?
It's often like a little power button if it's akin to.
It should be fine there.
You might have turned it off by accident, and I've done that before.
There you go, there's the next slide. So number 4, don't be rushed into signing anything. So, working on a game, getting that publishing deal is a dream come true. You've had the idea, the offer is being dangled in front of you. Here's all the funding that you need, all the security, you can go and make the game of your dreams, but you have to sign it in 24 hours. And it has to be almost immediately. You can't speak to anyone about it, you just have to sign it. That is a red flag, and I've had that before. I actually went to Gamescom a couple of years ago, and I just had a meeting with a client, and they said, oh, we're really excited to speak to our publisher. And I was like, oh, that's cool. I'd love to come with you and just chat with you about it. So I kind of just sat in the room, and I was introduced to them and everything. The publisher literally had bought a contract with them to the meeting and basically expected to sign it in the room. And I don't think my client would have done that whether I was there or not, But I just thought, oh man, I didn't even realize that this happens. So if you ever find yourself in situations where you're dealing with someone who says, you need to sign this contract immediately and you'll get everything you ever dreamed of, probably take that with a pinch of salt. And again, like, go back to the other points of read your contract, make sure you understand it, do some due diligence, etc. This one's slightly more of a technical point. As I said before, we really recommend that you sign a contract as a company, or we really recommend that you create a company before you release a game. One of the reasons I mentioned earlier, sort of jokingly, but it's true, is about tax. But I'm not going to get into that, but that is important. But the main reason to do that is to protect yourself. So when you set up a company or a corporate entity, it creates a barrier between you as an individual and that corporate entity. And when you enter into contracts as a company, it creates a separation of sort of your liability, or like what danger you can be in. So as an example, if you sign a contract as a company and everything goes wrong, and for some reason you owe the other party hundreds of thousands of pounds and it's been a complete disaster, in that situation, no one can come after your house or your car or your PlayStation. Like, all those things are going to be fine. It's just whatever your company has. So again, I've had a situation where a client was pressured into signing as an individual. So they actually signed the contract as a company and then as an individual separately. And the whole reason behind that was, we want to make sure that you as the founder are invested in the project and you can't leave the project and just, your company becomes some empty shell. And like, from some perspective, that kind of makes sense, but there are other ways of dealing with that in a contract. But the problem is, the contract also said that every single party had like a certain amount of liability. This is the maximum amount of sort of money that you may have to pay out if things go wrong. And the individual had their own separate amount of liability, which was in the hundreds of thousands of pounds. And it was a big disaster. And luckily it worked out for them. We managed to sort of fix it, but it was a painful process. So just avoid that from the outset. This one is a bit more niche, but try and maintain some control over who has access to your work. So a lot of publishers will operate in different ways, where you'll have shared code repositories or GitHubs or whatever, and just make sure that you have control of your work, like practical access and control, because I've had times where, one particular instance where the publisher had set up this whole code repository and the developer was basically working off in their files or like on their system. And when the relationship sort of went south, the developer kind of got locked out of the files and everything, and they weren't able to get access to it. The thing on the meme, like, the game didn't get released on Steam by the publisher, but that's just an example of what they could have done if they wanted to, because they basically had everything they needed to do it. And that we'll come on to why that could be super problematic in one of my other points. The next one is try and create some separation between projects if you're working on multiple things. So again, many developers may have a contract to work on one particular game, but they've got their own side hustle going on, and they're creating their own game, or they're working on a separate project. If possible, again, from a practical perspective, keep these things separate. So whether that means separate GitHubs or separate code repositories, or also to the extent where you have the means to do this, like create separate companies to hold on to separate assets. So again, that's not the most practical thing, but that's the ideal situation where, again, if something goes wrong, in the example I mentioned where you owe loads and loads of money and someone's come after your company, if your other project is not connected to you or the company that you've signed that first contract with, then that's kind of safe. So you're not at risk of a publisher or another counterparty coming and just taking all of your work if it's all in one place. So, number 8, my favorite one. Budget for legal costs, because I'm sure if any of you have dealt with legal issues before, it can be really, really expensive. There's a saying in law, a contract is only as good as your ability to enforce it. Everything is well and good when it's written on paper, the relationship is great with the counterparty, everything's going fine. When things go south, usually a contract gets signed, put in a drawer, and never seen again. It's only when things go wrong that you start to read it, and the way in which you begin a legal claim can be extremely expensive depending on what it says in the contract. I had an example where for some reason both companies were based in the UK, but the contract said that if anything goes wrong and there's a dispute, we're going to solve this through arbitration in Sweden. I don't know why the contract said that, and this was a contract that was signed, and I didn't advise on this, of course. They came to us when the dispute occurred, and we asked, why is the arbitration in Sweden? And it turns out that the publisher had some company in Sweden, and they knew the procedure, and that was the whole reason behind it. But it turned out it cost 23,000 euros just to file the claim, and that's on top of legal fees. We had to hire some Swedish counsel because the laws in Sweden are slightly different, so that was slightly more. It was a whole thing. So when you are thinking about getting funding for your game, try and think about budgeting some legal costs in that funding. Obviously, I wouldn't say put it as a line item when you are asking for money from your publisher, because that can kind of freak them out that you want a bunch of money to potentially take action against them. But I think just keep that in mind in terms of cash flow and just like studio running costs. The other thing is consider obtaining insurance. Again, insurance, another dense topic that most people don't want to deal with. But again, when things like funding is really tight and it's difficult to get funding from publishers or from other sources, consider getting insurance. It can give you peace of mind, and there are some really excellent game-specific insurance companies in the UK, which I feel like people don't really ever talk about, but they do exist. So if that's something you want to hear about, please come find me afterwards. But yeah, just give some peace of mind. There's all types of different things that can be insured, so obviously speak to someone about getting the right thing for you, but that is an option. And the last one is, if in doubt, reach out. So if you really don't know and something really, there's a massive obstacle with your contract, or you're having a legal issue you just don't know how to deal with, come and speak to a lawyer. Obviously it sounds like I'm trying to sell my own services, but I like to think that I'm not a big, scary suit and tie lawyer where I'm going to charge you hundreds of thousands of pounds of fees just to come have a phone call with me. That's not me. That's not how my firm operates. And to be honest, that's not how most law firms operate in the UK. I think if you know anyone who works in law, or even if you don't, and you just reach out to a lawyer, they're very likely to just be open to having a call with you to just initially talk about an issue, particularly in the games industry, because we're all human. We understand how difficult this industry is at this time, and we understand budgets are tight. And I've worked with indies for a long time. We always just want to help out because we love this industry. We love the work that these indie studios do, and we kind of want to give back if we can. So yes, I do offer free consultations. That is my sort of self-selling. So get my details at the end if there are anything you want to talk to me about. So those are the main 10. I do have one bonus tip, which is, this is the kind of legal one. If you decide to ignore everything that I've said to you in the last 25 minutes or so, and you are in a room with someone who gives you a contract that they're telling you have 30 minutes to sign it, and we're going to give you all the funding for your game, and you've done no due diligence, and you really, really feel like you're going to sign the contract, these are the things you should look out for. I don't recommend you do that, but again, some people, they're going to go for it anyway, and everyone has their own circumstances. So look out. Again, this is mainly for publishing contracts, but think about approvals. Like how does your like how does the publisher approve your game, and like what are the triggers for getting this next stage of funding? Who owns the game? That's talking about IP ownership, and does the publisher get any additional rights? So things like cross-media rights or rights to merchandise. How do you get paid? So that kind of feeds into the approvals procedure. Usually, again, if you're familiar with the development process, there will be something called milestones. You deliver milestones. If they pass the sort of approvals procedure, you get paid the next chunk of money to make the next part of the game. Make sure you understand how all of that works. Maximum liability. What is the worst case scenario? Is like, what is the worst case in terms of the amount of money you could be owed if everything goes wrong and you completely fail to make the game or you miss all the milestones? Just what is the worst case scenario? And what are the termination rights? So how can you get out of the contract? How can the publisher get out of the contract? And what triggers those situations? So again, if you're going to ignore everything I've told you in this talk and you're going to look at the contract yourself and just sign it, look out for these things in particular, but we don't recommend you do that. So that's basically the majority of my talk. If you have any questions, please feel free to ask. But if you are, if I've stunned you into complete confusion and you don't want to ask anything right now, I'll be wandering around the show floor. So please come find me and either ask me questions or just tell me how much you enjoyed my memes. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rahul. Yes, we are running a little bit late, but it would be wrong not to do a Phoenix Wright style cross-examination at this point. So please put your hands up if you would like to ask something.
Thank you, very useful. Appreciate the. It's a borderline legal advice, but you did mention free consultation, so I'm taking my chances. So at what point of the let's say of a passion project that might become more serious at some point, you advise the team to seek legal representation or legal advice, and maybe in what form? Because I've read that it can be like a case by case whenever you need some consultation, or you could just pay a fee for that. It's maybe a yearly or whatever. So what do you recommend?
I mean, honestly, as someone who's dealt with loads of indie devs, I'd say the earlier the better. So if you have got to the point where you are creating the game, you've got ideas, you've written notes, you're starting to create the game design document, or you're starting to think about who I'm working with and how we're going to structure the company. Any of those situations is a great time to come speak to a lawyer, because again, with an initial consultation, we're not going to be giving advice that you for the whole process of developing a game. We're just going to make sure you're in the right direction, give you some advice, give you some tips. And the sooner you do that, the better, because the later you leave it, there may be things. I mean, one time we had a client who had already named their game and come up with a core mechanic that was related to the name of the game. And then it turns out that the name of the game was trademarked. And they came to us maybe like a year after they'd done that. But if they had spoken to us, we could have said, hey, we can just do a quick search on that. And then they wouldn't have had to go back and unwind all the mechanics. So again, the earlier the better is the answer to that, really.
Do I see a hand? Okay, excuse me. An incredibly inconvenient place to sit, but...
Hello. Slightly related. If you're working just as a solo dev, would you also recommend kind of going through this process and specifically setting up a limited company rather than like going sole trader, that kind of thing?
Yeah, I mean, I think, again, we've dealt with both sole traders and also just solo developers. Generally, I think setting up as a company is the easiest way to do it. And I think that also, from people that are from like counterparties who are dealing with you, I think it just makes things easier if you have a company. But I think it really depends on your specific situation and circumstances. And on that, I think whenever you're thinking about doing anything sort of commercial or businessy, like the game has gone from just being an idea to I'm actually taking this forward and doing something with this, we'd always recommend you have a chat with us, just because we can sort of give you some tips and that are more specific to your situation. Thanks.
Thank you very much. And I can see these hands are going up, but I'm afraid I'm going to ask you to join me in thanking Rahul Gandhi.